Everybody. Hello. We're going to start a little early, if that's okay. Yeah? Can you see us up here? Okay, good. So people may wander in and out since the topic was going to start at 1, but we've got such a fantastic panel. And I noticed all the questions from the last session, so we thought we'd just go ahead and get things going. My name is Kate Heilpern. I'm the chair of emergency medicine at Emory in Atlanta. And we have a very distinguished group up here today. Rob McCormick at Buffalo, Brian Zink, whom you all know, Melissa White also at Emory, and Mark Angelos at Ohio State. So we've got some diversity in the panel, some diversity of position, and some diversity of experience and opportunity. And what we want to talk about, and Brian and I will give a few opening remarks, and what we want to talk about is when you are approached or when you're thinking about stepping into an interim position, whether it's, an operations role, whether it's as program director, as chief or chair, or, head of ultrasound, whatever it might be, we want you to lead with intention. And so what we thought we would do is have Brian talk for a couple of minutes about personal mission, vision, and values, and sort of using that as your guidepost. I'll talk a little bit about perils and promises when you step into an interim role, trying to avoid some of the landmines. And then we've got some questions for this distinguished group of panelists, and Brian will moderate that and lead us through. And we've got about an hour, maybe a little bit more, and we would love for you to have some questions for the folks who are sitting up here. Okay? So I'm going to turn it over to Brian. He's going to make some remarks about mission, vision, and values.
Great. So thanks, Kate. So yeah, I think it's really important as a developing leader to take some reflective time to develop this personal mission and vision statement and to live and breathe that mission and vision. For those of you in the CDP, we talked about the MVV, the mission, vision, values of your department, and how you need to create that with your faculty when you first take over a chair position. But on a personal level, you need to do this too, and you need to be accountable to it. It's going to be like the MVV of your department that you always come back to. You need to do that with your own personal mission and vision. But you really need to kind of reverse it, because your own mission and vision has to come from what your value set is. So it's really got to be VMV or VMM in terms of VMV. Yeah. And so your mission statement has to incorporate what your core values are, or it'll really be pretty meaningless, and you won't follow it. So if, for example, you highly value your family role, whether as a wife or a husband or mother, father, parent, that you need to have that in your personal mission statement. You may not be showing that to others professionally, but it should be that thing that you come back to. You should be able to recite this from memory. It should be short, similar to the elevator speech that you would use for your professional work, where between floor 6 and ground floor, if you see someone on an elevator and you want to influence them, or you want to get to know them, or to have them remember you, it's 2 or 3 statements that you can do in those 6 floors that will make someone remember you. But it's the same kind of idea, that it should be short, something that you can pull out of your memory. So it might be something like, my vision is to help patients with emergency cardiac conditions through research and education, and to be a supportive, loving wife, daughter, and friend. That's a good personal mission, vision statement. Or it might be, my mission is to be the best father and parent I can be, and to educate and mentor future leaders in medicine. So it should incorporate both your personal, and maybe for some people it's going to be, I want to make a positive impact on the environment, or I want to do something in the community, or there may have, in terms of your religion or spirituality, it may have components of that. But it's not a paragraph, it's 2 or 3 sentences, and whether you keep it in a journal or on the notes section of your phone, or if you tweet it, however you're going to do it, you should really get this. I made a little about 2-3-page primer on how to do a personal mission and vision, and I'll give that to you. It's just in a PDF or Word document. that we'll share with you when we send out all the information and the slides and everything. But just to say, try it. If you haven't done it, you might, in your annual evaluation with your chair, you're probably doing a statement about goals or something, goal setting. But try to condense something down that is your personal anchor, and that's what you're going to come back to when you might, for instance, have an interim position possibility come up. You're going to say, well, is this consistent with my personal mission and vision to do this job? And if it is, then maybe you go forward. If it's not, then you have to think about it more. So I'll stop with that because we want to get our panelists involved. And but I'll give you a little primer on personal mission and vision. But just try it. If you get a few minutes, either back when you're going back on the plane or whatever, just try putting something down on paper and playing with that. Thanks.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And sometimes in the heyday of our lives, we don't pause and do things like that, but it's really quite valuable because it really becomes the center of who you are, and when you're quite honest about it, then it just begins to trip off your tongue, and what you'll realize is that everything you do is based on that centerpiece, which is your personal mission and the values that you hold, and that's, those are the hallmarks of great leaders. The ability to articulate that in large part. I want to talk a little bit about an interim position and some of the things that I learned when I did it. I've done it twice. In 2006, I was asked to step in as the interim chair at Emory while the sitting chair went off and did a sabbatical. So I was technically acting chair, but about 4 or 5 months into his sabbatical, he called me and said, I don't want to come back as chair. So I said, okay, well, I guess I've just moved from acting to interim. And then a national search was done, and I was named the chair in 2007. So I was moving along and chairing the Department of Emergency Medicine at Emory, minding my own business, haha. And 4 years later, in 2011, the dean stopped me after one of the healthcare board meetings with the system CEO. They sort of cornered me in the hallway, and I couldn't really move one side or the other. And they said, we'd like you to serve as the interim chair of Family and Preventive Medicine. I said, Family and Preventive Medicine? I'm not a family doc. And they said, well, we know. And I said, oh, God. I said, are you asking me to step down as chair of emergency medicine? And they said, no, we want you to do this too. I said, wow, well, can I go home and talk to my family and have some time to think about this? And the dean said, of course, just call me first thing in the morning. So that's one of the first lessons about accepting an interim role. Normally, you don't have a lot of time to really think about it. So I want to talk about 5 or 6 elements, and I too will have a very brief, 1-2 slide handout for you that you can, download at the end of this whole thing. I want you to think about a couple of things. If you're a note taker, these are the topics I'm going to touch on. Imposter syndrome, because boy, did I ever feel that with family and preventive medicine. Time. Wellness. Backfill. Murky or clear. Murky or clear. Appropriate support. How long are you asking me to do this? And compensation. Okay? So, first of all, from the perspective of imposter syndrome, I think you just need to put that aside, not even in a parking lot. If you're being asked to step in and serve an interim role, it means that the system leadership sees something in you that perhaps isn't really quite yet evident to you. And if that's the case, rather than saying, oh gosh, I'm not qualified, I can't possibly do this job, perhaps you might want to reframe it and sit down with them and say, why have you asked me? It's a really legitimate question. Why have you asked me to do this job? And so therefore, the leaders are forced to basically articulate what the leadership qualities are that they see in you, why they've asked you to do this, and what problem, hopefully, you're there to solve. If it's a good fit, what they're doing is they're picking up on your attributes of leadership that hopefully will help move whatever that unit is to a new envisioned state. And so it may help you to better understand what the problems are in that operating unit before you step in. So that's an important set of questions, okay? From the perspective of time, let's face it, everybody sitting up here has served in an interim role. It will really, really challenge your time, because if you're being asked to serve as an interim, chances are you're a very successful leader already, and so you don't have a lot of time on your schedule, okay? So you've got to be very honest with yourself about that. With respect to time comes the double-edged sword of wellness, and you've got to guard against the morass of doing double duty, meaning that you have got to find a way and negotiate for the opportunity to have someone else step in to backfill the positions you are currently doing. So, for example, when I stepped in as interim chair of family medicine, I had to create a new leadership structure in family medicine. So, and because I'm not a family medicine physician, I had to quickly sort of scan the room and get a sense of who did I think could sort of rally around and bolster the department and teach me about what it means to be a family and preventive medicine physician. And I was very honest with them, very honest. And I used them to basically gain credibility and picked their brain constantly about working in the ambulatory setting, in inpatient service and family medicine, you know, what their relationships were like with other departments. And not for one moment did I pretend that I was one of them or try to supersede any of that. By the same token, in my own department, stepping into now a second, I had to identify people who could come in and backfill some of my responsibilities as chair of emergency medicine. And that was hard. That was, there was some mixed success there. But you've got to pick carefully people you can trust. You also have to be an honest broker with your family and those around you at work, your work family, about wellness. Help them by saying to them, look, I really need you to be a barometer about when you think I'm getting a little crispy, or recommending to me that I go off and get a massage or go for a run or do those kinds of things. And your family has got to buy into this, because there will be a chew on your time, as the panelists will discuss. With respect to the murky clear question, I found that when I was asked to serve as the interim chair of family medicine, what the system leaders were looking for was a quick fix to put somebody in so that they didn't have to worry about it as much anymore. And I also found, sadly, that they were not very honest with me about what the problems were in the department. And that was unfortunate, because the problems were deeper than I think many people knew. So it took my 1 year, I'll do this for 1 year, turned into 3. So try to, at the outset, get some time with the dean or the hospital system leader and really get some private moments to say, okay, what is your sensibility about what the issues are here? What will success look like in 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 18 months, however long you're trying to negotiate time in that position? And tell them you're going to report back frequently. I created a Gantt timeline when I stepped into that job. You know, by 6 months, we will have done this, you know, by 12 months this, and I worked backwards from the goal setting I was trying to achieve for that department a couple of years down the line. For example, we were moving them to patient-centered medical home. They didn't believe that they could do that. And so we set about doing that with all due haste and steadfastness, and they got NCQA Level 3 designation. And it was a point of incredible pride for this department that had been a bit of a red-headed stepchild. We also worked really hard on their budget so that they were not in a deficit any longer, and actually, you know, we're budget neutral. These were the kinds of things that helped lift that department up and made them feel really good, but we set realistic timelines. I also, in that setting, tried to spend some time communicating back to the leaders what I felt the issues were. And, you know, I talked about murky clear and some opacity. It turns out that the leadership didn't really know what all the issues were. And so there was some learning that happened for them. I invited the dean and the hospital system leaders to come in and meet with the faculty. They didn't know them. So they got to know them, the practice plan leaders, and that was also really helpful. So when you're stepping outside your comfort zone, use the leaders above you and connect them with the people that you're leading. I think that that is a great opportunity there. From the perspective of compensation, I do think that if you're taking on an interim role, that you should be appropriately compensated. You cannot be compensated for all the time, but you should negotiate at least a bit of a supplemental stipend to your compensation. And you should ask how that will be handled and whether or not, you know, there's an opportunity for you to receive any kind of an incentive or bonus. I think you will have earned it in that setting. And if you achieve your goals, I don't know how it works at your local institutions, but you should be articulate about that. Everybody knows, all system leaders know that when they ask someone to step in and take an interim role, it is a sacrifice. It is also an unbelievable opportunity for you to have your reach in some ways exceed your grasp, so that you're really trying to almost, you know, do chin-ups on a bar to get yourself higher and higher in a good way. Your faculty, your residents, the staff will begin to see you in new ways. And if you are articulate and honest about what you don't know, that is the most helpful. And what I found is that people really, really will rally around you. When I stepped in as interim chair in emergency medicine, I felt that so much from the leadership team and basically from everybody in the department. And so I'm curious, in this room, apart from the folks on the panel, how many of you have either served or are serving in an interim capacity? Great. Okay. Are some of the comments here resonating with some of you? Yeah, okay, about some of the lessons learned. All right, good. What I'd like to do is stop here and turn it over to Brian. He's got a fantastic panel. He'll introduce them in a little bit more detail. We've got some questions for the panelists, and then what we really hope is that you all will ask some questions of this august group. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, not many of us would have the opportunity to be the interim chair of another department. So that's interesting for 3 years. I mean, so I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and then just give a brief overview of their interim role and what. And then for the first, I have a bunch of questions, but the first would be just like, how did you, when you were asked, how did you decide how to say yes, and then maybe some of the negotiations for what the position was going to be like. So maybe Rob, can we start with you?
Sure. I don't know. Is this on? Okay. So I'm Rob McCormack. I'm a chair of emergency medicine at the University of Buffalo. And about 4 years ago, I was asked to be the interim chair while the search went on, and I accepted that role. I've been at Buffalo for about 22 years, at that point about 18 years, and was functioning in a leadership role as chief of emergency medicine for the health system. And the current chair at the time was retiring, but it was a slow retirement. And so I spent a lot of time taking over the chair's role, or doing the work of the chair before before he actually decided to retire. And at that point, they asked me to be the interim while a search was done. And so I served in that role, and then after a national search, I was given the position. So.
Yes, and so were you considered in the pool from the beginning of the search? Like, were you able to enter into the search then from the beginning?
Yes, I I had gotten myself involved in various levels at the university. My primary role was in hospital, in the emergency department hospital administration as a chief of service for the hospital system. But I also got myself exposed and involved in the university leadership, and was on a kind of the leadership council of the university, so had exposure to the dean that way. I knew what I wanted. I wanted to be chair of this department. I also knew that if I didn't get the chair, I was ready to move on, that I had been doing the role for a while. So I kind of, I was very aware of the search process, making sure that it was clear I wanted to be a candidate and be considered, and so was involved was a candidate from the very beginning. The department itself, we had kind of gone through a lot of growth in the previous 5 years. A lot of that was kind of financial and role changes that I was a leader in. And so I kind of knew where I fell within the department itself. There was probably only 1 or 2 internal candidates that I was competing against. Even then, it was kind of clear that if it was an internal candidate, it would be me.
And can you talk a little bit about your initial negotiation for the interim role? Like you said, you were kind of doing the duties of the chair, but was there something on paper, or how did that evolve?
No, I was doing the duties of chair informally, doing the work while the current chairman was doing less, and I really had most of the practice plan, our financial entity. I was kind of doing 90% of that work. The chair remained very active with the university, but not with the actual business of the practice plan. When it came time for him to step down, or when he made it official that he was stepping down, the dean approached me. It's a trade-off. I clearly wanted the role. I wanted them to know I wanted the role, but it also takes away your negotiation position in that situation, right? So I wasn't aggressively, I didn't aggressively negotiate at the interim time. My compensation actually remained the same. My clinical time decreased, so I had time to do the chair's job. But and then when it came time that they offered me the position, again, I didn't have that advantage in negotiation. I still was able to negotiate well, but it wasn't, the cards were on the table, and I wouldn't do it differently in retrospect because I knew what I wanted, and it was a fair compensation offer where I was able to negotiate were things that were not for me, for the research program for the department, for future recruitment, but not necessarily in a personal financial way.
Great, thanks. Melissa, go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll talk about a little different interim role.
Yeah. Absolutely. So my name's Melissa White. I am the program director at Emory University. I've been the program director for about 9 months, served as the interim the year prior to that. And to give you guys just a little bit of a history with emergency medicine, this is where Dr. Philip Shane has been the program director and was sitting program director for 17 years, and really reinvented the program and brought us up from really almost being on probation to really reaching some national status. And so as I received a call from Philip, it was a little unexpected, to be honest with you. He didn't pull back as much, and in true Philip fashion, he continued to carry on as he always did with his roles. And so the initial call to me as the associate program director, and I had been a sitting program APD for about 5 years, and then prior to that an assistant program director about 3 years, so was in the residency program already, but also carried other hats within the department. So as a medical director for several ground ambulances, medical director for a flight service as well. And so my clinical hats were very different. And so along with raising 3 children, getting the call from Dr. Shane saying, I've taken a DIO position, I want you to step in as interim program director. And so, right, your heart kind of stops for a little bit, and that imposter syndrome, as Kate was saying, really kind of set in, oh, can I do this? Can I not? And really it took that guidance from my colleagues, from Philip, from Kate, from my friends and my family, and going back and really thinking about my values, as we had talked about, of my personal values. I do my three things. Dr. Cheryl Heron will talk about her F's. Corey Silvas will talk about 5 things. But really for me, it was faith, family, and friends. And those are my core things, my core identities, my core values of my vision statement, my personal vision statement that I went back to. And outside of the imposter syndrome of really stepping forward and saying, I can do this, does this align with my personal values and my vision statement for both me personally and professionally? And so going back and really making those decisions really led me to where I was and creating the ability to say yes and to get past that imposter syndrome and to say, you know what, I am good enough to do this and I'm going to excel at this. Now the interim piece was a little bit different, and being a program director in an interim position, the decision was to have a national search. And so I will say I did feel like I was a little bit on the Bachelor or Bachelorette, you know, where you're the candidate, but there may be some others coming in and vying for your position. And so it made for some interesting dynamics, which I can speak to a little bit later, but really creating that vision statement initially as I came in as program director. What did I want to do in 5 years, 10 years, even though I might not be the program director who's ultimately named, was a little tricky, but was so important in guiding me. And to be honest with you, when I initially created my vision statement for what I wanted to do as the program director, I actually had to go back and recreate it several times, because I found as an internal interim, I actually limited myself because I already knew kind of the workings of the program. I knew what had been tried. I knew this, you know, certain things that I think would work and certain things that wouldn't. And really it took my colleagues coming back to me and saying, think bigger. Think if this place worked exactly how you would want it to, think bigger and create your vision from there. And that was really integral in me really creating how I wanted this program to work, where I want it to go, and to say, you know what, I can still break down those barriers in the meantime.
So just real quick, did you have any sense that you could negotiate anything about your interim position, or did you just say, Phil, you know, once you got over the imposter syndrome, said,
yes,
I'm going to do this? I mean, was there any, at that level for that position, was there anything that you tried to negotiate for or not?
Well, initially, when I received the call, he said, I really want you to consider this. I think you would be fantastic, and I want you to be our interim. However, I do want you to go back and speak to your family. And so really made that, already made that connection of this is where they're expecting me to sit and to stand in. And then when I met with Kate, it was clear. We actually had a document that I signed. She had the foresight to tell me, okay, I understand you're medical director for all these other services, but in order for you to achieve what you want to in this interim position, because we want to see what you can do, I really think that you need to pull back from some of your other roles. And that was difficult because I love my EMS. I love my flight medics and my ground crews. They've been my family for 13 years. But really had that foresight to say, I really think for you to do this, you need to take this back. I need to take this off of you. I will help backfill those slots. And then in the meantime, we will fill, you know, your other roles behind you. And so we talked about that. There was a formal contract that was signed for the interim role, which had to do with a little bit more bought down time in different areas, but really laid out those expectations.
Great, thank you. Next we have Mark Angelos. Mark.
So I'm the chair of emergency medicine at Ohio State. My interim experience began in 2011. I've been at Ohio State probably 27 years, so I grew up in that department, of course, had great insight into how things went. And during all that time, we had our inaugural chair who served there for many years, more than 2 decades. So there was never any thought about a time where there might not be our chair there. And then the system announced that he'd be retiring, and so we all kind of sat back and waited. This was something new we'd never experienced before. You know, well, what comes next? And nothing happened until June 15th, you know, as he's retiring July 1st. And then they interviewed a few of us and said, we want, and then speaking with me, they said, we'd like you to be an interim chair. And of course, I had no idea what that meant, and they didn't really have anything to explain about that. They just said, we want you to be the interim chair, we want you to function as a chair, and then we're going to do a national search, but there was no timeline for that as well. So that process lasted 2 years, and at the end of 2 years, they concluded a national search and brought in an external candidate, and then I stepped away. So I learned, and then 2 years later, I became the chair. So having the perspective of now, looking back, I would just say if any of you are in this situation, I would be more than happy to talk with you. I learned so much through that process and was so naive going into it. One of the things, as I think back, the only really useful advice that the dean gave me was, he said, you are the chair. You need to make all the decisions that a chair would make, because I was kind of thinking, is this kind of a temporary position? Am I just kind of a place card, until they get the national search done? But that was the best advice he gave me, and that served me better than anything else. But it was a real learning process. The other thing, I'd had no aspirations for that type of leadership. I was the vice chair of research. My academic focus was all about research. I was right in the midst of writing what I thought were some great grants, not always viewed that way by reviewers, but felt like, yes, I'm finally, arriving to a position that I want to be, and then this happened. So it was really interesting to think what happens with this national search. So kind of like what Rob was saying, I guess if you become the internal candidate and you become the chair, well, you have a set path. But if you don't, what do you fall back on? And so I was always kind of haunted by, what do I do with the vice chair of research? And I just decided I'm going to keep that and see what happens. So I did, and I'm glad that I did. But many great lessons came out of that experience, looking back.
Thanks, Mark. So just a couple comments and Chairman, you heard that negotiation, when you are offered the job on June 15th and you're supposed to start July 1, I mean, it's just, is it yes or no? And you're probably not going to be able to even get on the dean's calendar to say, I want to negotiate this. So it isn't necessarily the best opportunity for negotiations, but I would say that some of the core stuff, like what am I going to get paid, how much clinical time am I going to work, some of the things you're probably not going to negotiate for 5 new faculty lines or something like that when you're in the interim role in that short decision-making period. But don't think that you have no negotiating power, because if you say no, look around. Who's going to do it? You might be the only person that really has a credible reputation to assume the interim role. So don't think that you have no negotiating power, even though the time will be short. And then the second thing that struck me as Mark was speaking was there's going to be a lot of stuff to do as an interim. So when the previous chair is either retiring or leaving, and I experienced this at Brown, so I decided to leave over probably like a 6 or 7 month period. And there were a lot of things that I wasn't going to do as I was leaving, including making some transitions of division heads and some things where I talked with people about it, but I wasn't going to do it, act on it, and then run out the door. It didn't feel right. And I think most chairs who are leaving, or in any position, program directors, they're not going to make a whole bunch of changes. You're in a kind of a lame duck status. So you should expect as an interim that you're going to have to make some decisions that were a little kind of hanging around that needed to be made, because the exiting person really isn't in a position to make major decisions. It wouldn't be right, wouldn't be fair if they're halfway out the door. So you shouldn't just say, oh, I'm just going to come in and maintain. You're actually going to have to make some key decisions probably early on in your interim role. So the next questions we had were about the, just kind of a generic question, what do you wish someone had told you or wish you'd done before you accepted or started the new interim role? So just kind of a lesson learned in terms of what you wish, something you wish in reflection that you might have known about or someone would have told you.
Yeah, I think that they are asking you a favor in a lot of situations here, and I think you hear that you're you get the imposter syndrome, oh, I can't believe they're asking me, and of course I take this, but they are asking you to solve a problem for them, and I think it gives gives you a great opportunity to talk to them and find out what their perspective is. So in the case of being a department chair, it gives you the chance to ask the dean what they think of the current department. What are they looking for? What do you want me to do in this interim role? What do you think are the biggest concerns the department needs? And so I think it's a real opportunity to, if you want the permanent role, it gives you a little insight into what they're thinking, and you could play to that. But also, it gives you a very good, it's a good opportunity to ask them exactly what they want you to do. So I don't think, I think sometimes somebody asks you to do it, you might be a little hesitant to have a lot of questions back because you want to show the confidence that you can do it. But it is, I think, a good window to find out what the dean feels of the department and what the shortcomings might be.
So Melissa, anything you wish that you would have known or someone would have told you before taking the interim program director role?
No, I think, so this is maybe a little bit more granular in that as a medical director for the EMS services, I did not feel this way, but when I stepped into this leadership role as interim program director, I found that my world got really quiet. And I think I kind of felt like I was part of the team as an APD and as a general staff. And as you move up into an interim position in particular, but as a program director or a chair, I find those leadership roles, it's a lot quieter than I thought it would be. And by that, I didn't have my colleagues that I could just talk to, and now we were all competing against each other as well. And now your roles changed and you're seen differently within the department. And so maybe that's a pressure that I put upon myself, but it did. It felt just a little bit quieter. I didn't have as many people coming to me telling me this, that, or the other. On the same token, or on the opposite side of the token, I guess I should say, it was louder in other aspects. And because being a program director, I work so closely, clearly with the residents, there was a lot more chatter from the residents themselves. And so anytime I made some statements or if I pushed something through, because there was necessity, there were things that had to get done and things that were happening within the residency program. And so what was surprising is how quickly our residents felt the change and how much they did not like the change and how they voiced that change. And so creating a professionalism, especially if you're in a role where you're going to be dealing with residents, hopefully your faculty would not react this way, but for me, our residents lashed out online with some things, and so there was a big professionalism growth moment, if you will, and also opened my eyes that not everything is rainbows and unicorns, and really, you have to really manage the entire team and really have everybody online with your vision, yet be flexible with other people's opinions.
Great. Mark, any insights from it? What you wish you would have known?
That's a book that I could write. But I think one thing is, how to operate in that role of interim chair when you've been one of the frontline, working people. And when you talked about the senior leadership, it was always those people and why don't they understand this? And, and when you get in that role, you find out, or as I found out, you really have two bosses. You have the dean, who's truly your boss, your direct report, but you also have your faculty. And they all don't see things the same way always, and so that puts you in the middle trying to mediate. The dean thinks we should do this, and he really has some good reasons, and, faculty's eyes are rolling back in their head. And, you can't go to the dean and say, the faculty are totally unhappy. I mean, you can, but you have to do that in the appropriate way. So just kind of that dynamic of working between the faculty, for the benefit of your faculty, and also helping move the dean's agenda for, the college or the medical center.
Yeah, I think the idea that as you go farther up the ladder, that it gets lonelier. And it's really interesting. You think you have more contact with people, but at the Michigan Medical School graduation this past Friday, the former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy talked about, gave a wonderful address, but he talked about how lonely he was when he was in the Surgeon General role, that he had, you know, lots of interactions and represented, you know, the United States government and health and everything, but he described it how he had never been lonelier in his life, and that he had to deal with this loneliness, and he worked with friends and family and tried to, you know, kind of combat that. But it really is true that you should be prepared for feeling a little isolated, and that you can't necessarily use the people that you might have been your peers as your sounding board, or the people you're going to turn to for advice. I mean, you might be able to in some cases, but there's going to be a separation. And I think secondly is, don't underestimate, even though you're a person coming from those ranks, and that you're a known person, the change is going to be really a major thing to deal with. And I know Brian Klein, who is the interim chair at Brown, who took over for me, I mean, the faculty's resistance to the change of me leaving and him coming on was much greater than what, and I've been trying to advise him, much greater than what I thought it would be. And a lot of negative sentiments came out, a lot of acting out, a lot of really negative behaviors came out from a small percentage of faculty, but you wouldn't think having an interim would be that big a change, but it's really something that you have to manage in the interim role, is that people react very vigorously to the change. All right, any comments? Yeah, go ahead. We can open up now, yeah.
Is it ever appropriate to negotiate that you want the position and you don't want to be interim?
Well, I'm asking to follow up on that same question. Like, all of you guys were interim, and then you were chairs or program directors. So why be the interim? Like, why do they have a national search?
Can I start that one?
Well, one quick thing I would point out, is your university may require one, and the diversity issue, if you have a white male sitting in a position and you just roll that obvious interim person in, that creates an issue in terms of diversity. So some universities, I think appropriately, are doing searches even if they know they have a really strong internal candidate. Go ahead, Mark.
So I was just going to approach it from the individual applicant standpoint, because once I got in there and then they started talking about a national search, people started asking, well, would you be a candidate? And I thought, oh, I can be a candidate, right? So yeah, yes. But then I kept hearing, you know, the experts saying, you know, if you want to be the chair, never be the interim. And other people said, well, being an interim is good training, you know, and experience for being the chair. And so it probably varies from institution to institution, but what I have seen more often is that when the university or the medical college says they're going to do a national search, that means they really want to bring in someone from the outside. And usually when you become an interim, it's because some sort of crisis event has happened. I mean, maybe it's only retirement, but maybe it's something else, and maybe things have really gone south. And so the feeling often is at the higher level, my opinion, is we need to get somebody who's not associated with the failures of the department, i.e. people who have resided in that department. No matter individually how good they are, we need someone from the outside. So many people will tell you that the bias is going to be in a national search for the outside candidate, and many times that is true. So I think that's something you have to weigh, because you don't have to accept the role of interim chair. You can stay aside from that and become the internal candidate, and some people think that works better. I don't know. I think there was a lot of value if you do have that experience as interim and you want to be chair. It sets you in a good position to go somewhere else and become a chair. It may or may not be a disadvantage at your own institution.
Yeah, I think there is an advantage even when you're interim to a national search. And those advantages, one is it gives you credibility when you ultimately get the job, right? That they looked across the country and picked you. The other is these are your peers that are experts in this business, and so it's almost like a free consultant, right? They come in and they evaluate your department, and you know, if you can get that information of what they would do differently or improve. It's kind of has that advantage of an expert review. And then the other is it might make your request to the dean seem a lot more reasonable, right? You know, what they ask for in their role might make your 3 faculty people look much better compared to, you know, 10 faculty lines or something like that. So it is unnerving, but I think it's not as negative as it feels. And I have heard the same advice that, you know, if you want the role, don't do the interim. I'm not sure where that comes from. And I've definitely heard it, but I don't know the wisdom of that, because I would have had a very hard time watching somebody else take over a department that I've been integral for so long. I guess in a situation where you have power dynamics in that department, and maybe there's 2 leaders, and maybe that's a situation where you want to stand back and let the cards fall as they may. But I don't.
Yeah, I think those are really good points, and I think the idea that that this is not a day and age where people are getting, you know, $30 million chair packages, unless there's some endowment or something that's funding that, and that's really rare. So I think the idea that the interim is going to do so much worse than an external candidate. I mean, no one's got money at the institutional level, for the most part, to give enormous chair packages. So you can take things out over years, which helps with the institution if you do it over 5 or 6 years. But I think an interim may know the landscape better and make more reasonable requests. And I've counseled a lot of people in the last 3-4 years who have been putting together chair packages, and they're getting thinner and thinner. And so I don't think you're necessarily at an enormous disadvantage as an interim candidate.
And what I would say too, as interim, and although again it does feed into a little bit of that imposter syndrome, right? Especially as a program director, it's a little bit more unusual to have a national search for a PD. But I understood why, and Kate was very forthcoming with, we want this position to be elevated. And so it was made very clear, and her support was clear as well, but she was also very, it was very obvious to me that it was really what she wanted was to have a national search. It also allowed me to grow. And to be honest with you, it allowed me to step into this position to kind of test drive it a little bit, to push it, to really give it, let me do this. Yes, I may not want to push certain things, but you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to take this position, and this is my vision for it, and we're going to carry this as far as I can. And it really allowed me to embrace that position without saying I'm going to take it completely. And then along the way, I was like, you know what, this is what I want, and went back to our office and said, I'm coming after this position. What do I need to do? Is there anything I can do to make myself stand out, right, a little bit more? And they were looking at external candidates, and that was fine, but it only fueled my passion even more to get to even be better. What I will say, though, is it also brought in a different component of saying, I don't know if I could go back, right, to be in an APD. I don't know if I can. I love my program, but I don't know if I can go back and watch somebody else lead the program that I love so dearly. And so part of this process also included me looking at jobs, seriously looking at other alternatives behind the scene. And what that allowed me to do is to also show my worth a little bit more, and it allowed me to negotiate for maybe things that I wanted if I was to get the role. And so actually went back with a very robust package to Kate, where she was like, wait a minute, that's a lot. But, the answer is always no if you don't ask. And so that really kind of carried with me. But really, it also helped me see my value. And that was really important for me in my growth through leadership.
All right. I have some more questions, but I think we're going to open it up to you. And then if we run out of questions there, I'll come back. But so go in the back, and then Kevin. Yeah.
I was just going to comment about maybe 2 things. The first is I'm very interested in this idea of if you're interim, you get passed over, can you exist? Can you go back to your old role? And whether or not maybe when you're asked to be interim, if you were informed by the dean or led to believe that this would be your job if you did well or not. Because it feels like it would be difficult to go back to the old role, and if the plan is we're definitely bringing someone from the outside, or we really think we're going to bring someone from the outside, I'd probably have a pretty significant hesitation about taking the job and then stepping back. I when they ask you to be the chairperson of another department, it seems clear that your expectations are.
Well, I'm still getting recruited for family medicine.
You should do a course for that. That would be-
Your question is a really good one, and I'm just curious to hear what the panel has to say, because it can really go both ways, but you should negotiate going in, and you should try to think about the far side. What do you want to have happen for yourself? How do you want to be protected in some ways when the interim gig is over?
I would just say one thing. I think often, regrettably, the communication is really poor from whether it's the dean or whoever, that it's fuzzy for a lot of people. They don't know whether they're going to be an internal candidate, and they don't really have a sense of how long it's going to go. And so I think asking for clarity on that is a key thing. And I don't know if others have thoughts here. Robert?
Mark, do you want to talk? Or
Well, yeah, there was no clarity about that, and again, I probably wasn't even thinking to ask what that meant. The only indication I had that things would change is that when we get to the compensation piece, again, I had no idea, do chairs get paid more than everyone else? I mean, that's kind of the level I was at. So they said, oh, there's a stipend that comes with this interim position, and you'll get this stipend during the time you're interim chair, and then, that would go away. So that was the only concept I had that, things were changing, but it was a temporary change based on how long it went. No discussion about another position.
I would just add, we're in a current chair search for one of the big departments in a med school, and an internal candidate is in the interim role. And after the first round, she was removed, that she's not going to be considered for the final role. But I see her moving back to her role, or also having this fantastic opportunity to know what it's like to be a chair in this. So, it's a bad situation for her, but in the equation, I think it's overall a win.
Kevin, you had a question, and then we'll get the comment.
I was kind of in the PD type situation in turn, but I inherited it, it was relevant in the sense of what do you do afterwards in that transition and what you expect. Because I was told in April, all of a sudden, this person's stepping down, do the interim. Had to APD and PD, and they didn't tell me I inherited multiple double citations from this. But I had to deal with immediately. And yet I had to give up the other stuff that I had reestablished the EMS fellowship. That's why I've been hired, as I had to give that up. So the challenge is, with that is like people were saying, how do you stay? But also you have to give things up to go into a position. It's not just can I step back, but how can you move forward in that? And like in that situation, luckily it worked out, but it's with a lot of work. But what do you do if you're in that position for say 6 months, 5 months, stepping, even if you wanted to back in that role, someone may be doing your job in that interim capacity to fill in for you. So what recommendations would you have for us if we're caught in that position of how to maintain our position in that department we want to stay, because the potential may be more difficult even if we want to, because other people may be involved in filling in the gaps that we could have left because we're filling in for another person in the interim.
Yeah, I would just say, I think, is kind of similar. We think there's no negotiation here, but you do have some power in this. And I think, like, for that, it should have been, can I go back to being the EMS fellowship director? And it has to be clear that that person stepping in is in a temporary role also, because if I don't get this, and you have to kind of line up all the possibilities. And you need a few days to think through this, and it really isn't fair for a dean or someone else to say, well, I need your decision tomorrow on whether you're going to be the interim chair. I think that, or whatever the role is, I think you need to take that time and think through it, because if you do want to just settle back into what you were doing, if you were happy, and you're doing the interim more as a service to the entity, then you should be able to go back. I mean, a lot of people it changes them in terms of what their aspirations are once they do the role, but anyway.
Yeah, just my experience from being both being in an interim and getting a job, and being in and not getting a job. The first thing I would say is go and get your attorney to draw up a contract and stipulate what is in there, because it's hard. Physicians are not great negotiators, and then if you have a third party helping you kind of draft it, you could either send it yourself, you get somebody to draft that for you and stipulate what exactly is. And the other thing is that people think about financially, you have to realize that if you're stepping into a position like the chair, the institution a significant amount of money, that's going to push them to make a decision. And that's where you really have your negotiating power. You really have to, like, because otherwise there's no urgency.
Yeah.
And there's no urgency to get the position done, and then it'll just go on. And the academic institutes are notorious for having this national service that go on for 2 or 3 years when there's no urgency. So.
Yeah, and I've advised people who are going to say you should negotiate for, you know, whatever it is, the 10th or 20th percentile of the median chair salary for your region, because you can't expect that you're going to get the full chair salary, but you should get not just a little stipend on top of your base pay. I mean, you're doing the job of this, and you should be compensated for it. So I agree. I think that's a good point. Yes.
I'm just wondering about the stigma of going out and searching for a chair position when you've been the interim chair and you didn't get the full-time chair position at your own institution. Because I feel like, and while, you know, I'm sure people sort of can take the big view and say, well, it's a really competitive process, still, the people who knew you best, who saw you in a chair role, ultimately did not choose you, and there might be just sort of some filling in the gap. So let's say he does raise your aspirations and you decide, okay, well, I want to go and serve nationally. How do you address that? Do you address that? Does that sort of come up in your mind as you've been part of selection committees yourself and you've seen some of these candidates come by?
Any thoughts? I'm happy to comment. I don't want to dominate things. Any other thoughts with that?
Well, that is an important question, and I think you have to develop that narrative when you do that. And there are some very valid reasons why things would happen, and people are very interested to know. I mean, they can see your body of scholarly work, and, you know, they obviously think that that is someone that they want to interview, and there's always nuances there. And what I've found is, you know, I mean, I interviewed for a few chair positions, but just a few that I went to. Every chair position was looking for something different. And so I could speak to some of those better than others. So for instance, some chair positions, they're really looking for an operations person. It's all about turning their ED into a profitable, you know, cost center. That's the most important thing. They're interested in patient safety, quality, patient satisfaction. But other places, they're looking to build more, that more traditional academic program. So there, you know, maybe you fit if you've been active in research and scholarship and, you know, you have a CV that reflects that. So I don't think it's a game killer at all, but I think you do have to be conscious of exactly what you're saying, is people are going to ask you, you know, what was your experience and why didn't you become the chair at your place?
Anyone from the audience want to weigh in on that? I would agree with Mark said. You know, so at your place, maybe as the internal candidate, maybe it was their main goal was to build a big research-oriented department or to build that, and maybe you were primarily an educator, but that might be just what another program is looking for. And so I don't think it has to necessarily come out. I mean, a lot of this search stuff is relatively secret. And whether or not you were an internal candidate or not, you wouldn't necessarily put that on your CV. You would put that you were in an interim. So I'm not even sure that they would necessarily know. Maybe by word of mouth as they go on. But at least in the first round of the interviews for an external position, I don't think it's going to come up that much. And if anything, it'll be a feather in your cap because you've been an interim. So, other questions? Yes, Kirk?
As an intern, you have the day-to-day decisions that you have to make, but you often come across decisions that are more strategic and that are difficult to make in the interim positions. If you don't want to saddle someone else potentially with your vision, can you speak a little bit how you approach those, you know, big decisions that may potentially straddle your position as the intern?
In my experience, I was either going to be the job or move on, right? So I didn't struggle with that a lot. From the day I started the job, I said, I need to take this on as it's going to be mine. And I really felt it was like a test run, and I was going to prove that I could do it. I think you got to, you know, each department will be different, but you listen, and it's not, it's 6 months, it's 9 months, it's a year, it's 2 years, it's 3 years. And as Brian said, the person leaving the position often had a lame duck period or stopped making those strategic decisions. So my answer would be you have to do the best in that situation, and if you make long-standing or long-affecting decisions, so be it. You know, they've asked you to do this role, and so, you know, without a specific example, I think you have to move forward like you're going to be in the job, or that the next person will agree with your decision.
I agree. In the PD role, again, Kate was very available to me, but I would make those decisions, and I would have my reasoning why, and this is why I think it would be a good decision for us to break down the barriers with surgery, and for us to now be at the bedside rather than just at the airway. And then we had an incident with the Saudi government where we take Saudi residents, and I had to navigate a Saudi contract with the Saudi government, and so that has long-term implications for our program and how we run our program. And so she said, you know what, put it out there, tell me what you're thinking, what is your vision, why would this be the best thing for the program? And then she said, I will support you. So I was very fortunate, and in a PD position it's different than in a chair position, but that actually gave her more to work off of so she could see why I was thinking a certain way and if I would actually carry through with my vision and plan.
So I think actually it's your opportunity as interim to make the changes which you see, because probably you know them better than anyone during the time that you have. And on the one hand, you know, you're kind of proving your mettle on the job if you're interested in the full-time position. But what you find is your vision is probably greater than your resources, because typically you're not getting any new resources as the interim. They're saving that up for a chair package when, you know, you're named or someone else is named as the chair. So there are those restrictions, but still there are a lot of things that you probably see and have felt like needed to change, and it is your opportunity to do that. And so that can really be a strength.
Vicki, you had a question.
Yeah, I guess I was just going to follow up on that point before, because a lot of interims come about with crisis, and so then you are filling your role, and you are probably doing more jobs for cheaper. And so how do you create the urgency to do a natural search, or to kind of push to get that resolved? Because I feel like, speaking from personal experience, you can kind of do okay, and then it keeps not being, I don't know how to push to resolve the interim to a permanent position. Not me, of course, somebody else.
Well, if you're doing a good job as an interim, great. It'll take forever. If you want to speed it up, create your own crisis, and then they start over.
Thank you. That's what I was
Create your own crisis.
Create your own crisis.
If you're talking about in an apartment where you're seeing it with someone else, I think that's a chance for the faculty to go, or a representative of the faculty to go to the dean and say that the department's falling behind in this situation, or that we need more permanency or more resolution on this. Is that kind of the issue you're talking about?
Yeah. And for my position, I actually asked for a deadline because I had family obligations that I needed to put in place if we were to move and take another position.
All right, I think we'll, one more, go ahead, Dick.
So in the setting of the concept of there are no resources available for the interim, being that they're being saved for the next chair person or next person that they are earmarking, what strategies or what are the best strategies to negotiate for resources for the department in that situation?
I think the situation, I don't know, is more the long-term growth things that might not be available to that interim chair. So, you know, recruiting researchers but there are a lot of day-to-day things that need to be done. You know, the shifts, the schedule needs to be filled, and I think all those resources are usually available to an interim. It's more building the program to the next step, which in an interim role, if the dean, doesn't want to support that at this point, it's going to be tough to convince, right?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think the way to get resources as an interim is to make sure, to understand what the dean's trying to do in your department. And if you can align needs that you see in your department with goals and direction that he sees for your department, then yeah, they will give you resources. But it's short-term resources. They're saving up. I mean, in a sense, they're benefiting from your low-cost work, even though it's high quality. But if you can align yourself with what the dean or what the strategic plan of the medical center is, that's the way I think you can still get resources.
All right, good. Thank you, panelists, for a really interesting discussion. We're going to go ahead and close, and then obviously these folks, I'm sure, are happy to talk with you if you have specific questions about interim role that you want to address with them. And we'll get on with our next speaker. Joseph.